Many hundreds of years ago, there was a Rajput king who ruled in Delhi. He had two daughters, but to his great grief, he had no sons. However, one of his daughters married the king of Ajmer and the other daughter married the king of Kannauj. The king and queen of Kannauj had a son whom they named Jaichand. A few months later, the king and queen of Ajmer had a son and they named him Prirhviraj. The old king in Delhi was very proud of his two grandsons. Jaichand, being the elder, hoped to become king of Delhi on the death of his grandfather. His cousin Prirhviraj was as brave as he was, good looking, and everyone loved him. His grandfather, like everyone else, loved him better than Jaichand, and just before he died, the old man named Prirhviraj as the next king of Delhi. Thus Prirhviraj became king of Delhi as well as king of Ajmer, and all the Rajput princes owned him as their chief because he had followed the custom of those days and held a horse sacrifice or Ashwamedh. He was the last king to do so. A fine horse was brought and blessed by the priest, and then it was set free to wander where it pleased. It could graze wherever it was inclined, and it was always followed by the king's soldiers. Should any man refuse to allow the horse to feed on his land, he was bound to fight the soldiers. At the end of the year, the horse was sacrificed, but all the princes over whose land the horse had grazed had to take as their overlord the prince who owned the horse, for none of them had fought with Prirhviraj in battle and beaten him. The one person who hated Prirhviraj was his cousin Jaichand. He was bitterly jealous of his power. He would have been still more angry had he known that his beautiful daughter Samyukta and the hated Prirhviraj loved each other. This was how it had happened. Prirhviraj had a great friend, the poet Chand. They would often disguise themselves as poor men and roam about the country. On one occasion, they went to the city of Kannauj. Now Chand was always singing of the grace and beauty of the fair princess Samyukta, until at last Prirhviraj longed to see for himself whether his cousin's daughter were as beautiful as the poet said. While he was in the city of Kannauj, he saw her by means of climbing a tree that overlooked the garden of the palace. When he saw her, he thought she was even more lovely than the poet had sung, and to himself he said, "No other than the lovely Samyukta shall be my queen." He went back to Delhi to think of a plan, for he knew that Samyukta's father was his enemy. It seemed hopeless, and in his despair he told his old nurse about it. That wise old woman soon thought of a good plan. "Give me your portrait," she said. "I'll go to Kannauj, and I promise you that soon the princess shall love you just as much as you love her." The prince gave her a splendid portrait of himself painted on ivory. Taking this with her, she went to Kannauj. Once there, she obtained a post in the palace, and she did her work so well that at last she was chosen specially to attend the princess. During the long hot nights when the princess could not sleep, they went out on the roof in the moonlight, and the nurse told her long tales of old Delhi and of the brave, handsome prince who lived and ruled there. The princess loved to hear those stories, and one day she said, "Can the prince of Delhi really be as brave and handsome as you say?" "All men speak of his bravery," answered the nurse. "You shall see for yourself whether you think he is handsome." She showed her the beautiful portrait that was painted on ivory. After that, the princess asked nearly every day to hear more tales of Prirhviraj. And while the good nurse was talking, Samyukta would gaze at the portrait. "Tell me," said the princess at last, "how do you know so much about him? And who gave you this portrait?" Then the nurse confessed that she had come from Prirhviraj, and the portrait was a present that he had sent to the princess. And so it was in this way that Samyukta grew to love Prirhviraj. All the time that Samyukta was learning to love Prirhviraj, her father Jaichand was learning to hate him more and more, for he was ever growing more and more jealous of him. Day and night he plotted and planned to find a way of hurting him, and at last he thought of a scheme. He thought he could prove his own power and hurt Prirhviraj at the same time. Jai Chand decided to hold a great feast. It was to be a very special feast because during the festivities, his beautiful daughter, the Princess Samyukta, should choose her husband from among the princes who attended. He was really making up his mind to follow a very old custom called Maiden's Choice. At a feast of this description, all the princes had to do the work of servants. Even the doorkeepers and kitchen boys had to be of royal blood. It really meant that the prince who gave the feast was overlord of all the rest. Among the princes bidden to attend was Prirhviraj, and in this manner Jai Chand showed that he thought himself greater than Prirhviraj and that he was in fact his overlord. Samyukta knew nothing of the rivalry between neighboring princes. She only knew that she was free to choose her husband at the feast and that among the invited princes was her dear Prirhviraj. She could hardly hide her grief when the day of the feast dawned and she heard that Prirhviraj had not come. Some said that he had never been invited. Others said that he refused to serve Jai Chand, who had chosen him to stand at the great door as a doorkeeper. On the great day, the Rajput princes sat on their thrones in the magnificent hall. Outside, an enormous crowd waited to hear whom the princes would choose. The seat of Prirhviraj was empty, but at the door there was an ugly image of him, made in clay. This was to remind everyone that he should have been there as a doorkeeper. Close to the image stood two minstrels, and no one guessed that the minstrels were Prirhviraj and his friend the poet Chand. Neither did anyone guess that out in the crowd were 100 brave knights who only waited for a sign from their minstrel prince. Samyukta was very sad and hopeless as her maid dressed her and decked her with jewels. She lingered as long as she dared, wondering if by chance Prirhviraj would come even yet. At length she could delay no longer. She slowly entered the great hall, the bridal wreath in her trembling hand. As she entered, she saw the hideous image of her handsome lover, and hot anger made her lift her proud head even more proudly. No longer did she tremble. Slowly she paced round the hall with downcast eyes, passing each throne in turn. She did not glance at one of the waiting princes. At last she had passed them all and had come round to the doorway again. The king was about to speak when, to his utter astonishment, his daughter flung the bridal garland round the neck of the image of Prirhviraj. The prince was struck dumb with surprise. They turned to each other for explanation, and before they could recover, Prirhviraj himself had leaped forward and seized the princess. He seated her on his horse, which was just outside, leaped up behind her, and drawing his sword, he dashed through the surprised crowd. Chand rode by his side, and his 100 knights drove back those who tried to follow until the prince was well on his way. Then they too turned their swift horses and riding down or cutting down those who tried to stop them, they galloped to join their prince. For 5 days the brave little party rode, fighting all the way, and many of the brave knights were killed. But Prirhviraj and his princes reached Delhi safely. The matter did not end here, however, for Jai Chand swore that he would be revenged on Prirhviraj. For some time, Prirhviraj and Samyukta lived together in the greatest happiness. Then trouble came upon them. The Afghans under Muhammad Ghori attacked Delhi. Prirhviraj could get no help from his Rajput kinsmen. They were all under the influence of Jai Chand, who was only too anxious to see Prirhviraj defeated. According to some people, it was Jai Chand who had asked Muhammad Ghori to march on Delhi, promising that no help should be given to Prirhviraj. Prirhviraj was a brave man, so he wasted no time in lamentation. He placed himself at the head of his army, and they alone marched out to fight the enemy. They met and fought at Thaneshwar on the plain outside Delhi. So well did Prirhviraj lead his army that in the battle, the Afghans were beaten. Muhammad Ghori was wounded and his army fled. The Rajputs chased their foes for 40 miles and killed many thousands. Unfortunately, this did not put an end to the trouble. The Afghans got another army ready, and in less than 2 years they again came down against Delhi. From Lahore, Muhammad Ghori sent a message to Prirhviraj saying that he could either change his religion and become a Muslim or fight for his kingdom and his life. When the messenger came to Delhi, the Princess Samyukta knew that this was a terrible danger of which she had a warning in a dream. Not for an instant, however, did she think of trying to escape the doom that was threatening them. Prirhviraj was greatly troubled, for his spies had told him what a mighty army the Afghan leader had gathered together. He asked the advice of his wife Samyukta. Proudly lifting her head, she answered, "Draw your sword and cut down the enemies of your country. To die well is to live forever. Do not think of me, beloved. Whatever comes to pass in the fight, you and I shall be one hereafter and forever." The words of his brave wife were as the words of his own heart to Prirhviraj, and he prepared to fight Muhammad Ghori. He warned all the Rajput princes of the danger, but they were all in league with Jaichand, except the Raja of Chittor. He alone came to the help of Prirhviraj. Together they brought an enormous army against the foe, and again met the Afghans on the old battlefield of Taneshwar. The two armies were encamped on the opposite banks of the river Saraswati. Prirhviraj looked upon the strength of his army, and pity for the fine, strong men who must so soon die filled his heart. It seemed so needless. He sent a letter to Muhammad Ghori. In the letter he said, "You know the bravery of my men. They are ready for the fight and they are many and strong. Proof of their bravery is not needed. Give up your foolish plan and we will make peace. You shall return unharmed to your own country. Why should we needlessly sacrifice the lives of so many brave men?" The messenger came back from Muhammad Ghori with this reply. "This is the army of my brother. I am only its general. Before agreeing to any treaty, I must send a messenger to Ghazni for his orders. Let there be peace between us until the messenger returns." Prirhviraj was glad that his offer had been received in this way, and thought it only reasonable that the two brothers should confer together. But Muhammad Ghori had not sent this reply in good faith. He crossed the river at night in silence and secrecy, and at dawn he attacked the Rajputs. Taken by surprise and not expecting a battle, the Rajput army was in confusion. They were not in battle array. They fought bravely and with determination, and the battle lasted from dawn to sunset, but neither side had given way. At last the army of Muhammad Ghori broke and fled, and the Rajputs summoned their last strength to pursue them and make the victory secure. But Muhammad Ghori had kept in reserve 12,000 horsemen in armor. These men had taken no part in the battle, and it was all according to his plan that his army should flee at the end of the long day. The weary and scattered Rajputs pursuing their enemies were suddenly charged by this body of armor-clad warriors, and now the fight could only end in one way. 150 Rajput chiefs were slain with many thousands of their brave men. Flags, spears, shields, swords, splendid armor all lay scattered about the plain, while the dead lay in countless heaps. Prirhviraj was taken prisoner and cruelly murdered. Samyukta in her palace waited for news of her lord, but her heart was heavy with the fear of evil. She said to her maids, "He is gone from me here. We shall meet no more in the gardens of Delhi. Our meeting will be in the other world." So certain was she that she had the funeral pyre made ready, and she was standing by it when the weary, dusty messenger came to tell her of the death of Prirhviraj. She made no sound of weeping or wailing, but smiled bravely. "I will not keep my lord waiting," she said, and calling to Prirhviraj, she leaped into the flames. Jaichand and his friends, the other false princes, received the fate that they deserved. Instead of the gain they had hoped for, they paid dearly for their crimes and folly. In less than a year, the Afghans came down again. With another army, Jaichand and his friends were slain, and their kingdoms were lost, seized by the Afghans.